Okay. Q&A.
I got one.
Okay.
I got a cue for you.
Yeah.
So I want to know what's like the best evidence for Judaism and against, and see which case is stronger. And I was wondering, what do you think are the best sources of evidence for and against Judaism?
Well, I wrote a whole book on the subject.
I know.
You're familiar with it. So I cover there what I think are the strongest positive pieces of evidence for it that are, I would say, internal to the tradition. In other words, the part of the general of the tradition. I'm not doing abstract proofs of the existence of God or the fine-tuning argument and the rest, which I think do contribute.
Yeah.
I think they do contribute.
But I'm more interested in like Judaism in particular, because you can use that to get to any religion, or even no religion.
Yes, but you can use it to get away from atheism. So that's not worthless. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like the first step in catching the thief is to know that you've lost something. Mm-hmm. Right. So I don't think that can be ignored. It bears part of the burden of proof. I think just to stun people who are out of the picture entirely, you tell them that until 1965, all of the educated world believed that the universe has no beginning. The Greeks and the medievals and the moderns. And even when the universe was discovered to be expanding, they still concocted a way to make this expansion compatible with there being no beginning to the universe. All that time, the Jewish tradition was teaching that it does have a beginning. And in 1965, almost everything turned around. The Big Bang does look like the beginning of the universe. So it's the origin of time, which is another position of ours. So that's really shocking. How could these primitive, illiterate, ignorant, superstitious savages come up with something which only was accepted by the scientific world in 1965? That should give people pause, you know. And this is a concrete fact about the world. It's not some abstract philosophical idea which you either appreciate or not appreciate. But I think that evidence is a complicated subject. I wrote my book because I thought there was a hole in the literature. So I'm going to be partial to my book. I don't know anyone else who tries to organize and pull together and explain the relevance of evidence in the way that my book does. That's why I wrote it. Yeah. So there are snippets of other books that make contributions, but they aren't dedicated to the whole subject.
Yeah, and they don't address like why other religions don't fit.
So I have to tell you that I have a little bit about that in my book, but the appendices that are online, are 3 long appendices online. The book is 300 pages long. I had 450 pages worth of material. Yeah. And the publisher said, I'm giving you 300 pages. So I put the rest of it on. There's a lot of treatment of other religions online.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that. And I'm also wondering what's like the best case against Judaism. You know, I want to know which side's stronger. Do you know any good cases against it?
Let's put it this way. There are unanswered questions. But a case against would have to either attack one of the fundamentals or would have to show that something else some other position was superior. And that I really don't know about. I know ones that have a lot of publicity, like the biblical criticism or the higher criticism of the Bible, the documentary hypothesis. A lot of publicity. I have considered them. On my blog, I have sources which I would recommend anybody read if they are interested in that subject. Of course, people want it as a talking point. They don't want it as a subject, so nobody reads them. But there are good books to read on that subject. Archaeology is another one, which there are good things to read. On my blog, I have a lot of articles on archaeology, which should give people pause. So there are books that make a case which to the ignorant, untrained reader sound convincing, but then when you examine them, I don't think they're good cases at all. I don't think they're competing cases at all. There's something called a letter to my rabbi, which is only about 100 pages long. I used to get people who would send me the URL and say, well, what do you say to this? So I wrote back, you go through it and find me his best 3 arguments. I'll answer them for you. several people wrote back to me and said, well, of course, I didn't want to waste my chance on a weak argument. So I was looking for the best arguments, right? And I found out that I could refute his arguments by myself. Looking for I don't want to get the poor ones, so they saw themselves that they're worthless arguments. I don't need to do that. And several people did write me this one or that one, and I wrote back to them, and I refuted them. It wasn't too difficult. A guy, one of my key arguments is called the Kuzari argument. A guy wrote a whole book called Breaking the Kuzari. He calls himself the second son. Got it? What are the four sons in the Haggadah? The wise son and the wicked son. And he calls himself the second son. Well, he's a guy who grew up in yeshivas and decided to leave it, right? I won't comment on the appropriateness of his self-description. You know what I just did. And he wrote a whole book. So people asked me about it, so I started replying to it page by page. And by the way, I asked him for an electronic copy so I could just copy and paste, and he refused to give it to me. So I had to take pictures of it and put it through a PDF converter. And it was a big deal. By the way, the people who criticize me almost never quote my text. They say, Gottlieb said, and this is why he's wrong. And I've replied in detail to several of them. I simply compare what they say Gottlieb said, and here's what I wrote. And I asked, you read it, you tell me, is it the same? Is it not the same? It's not the same. So if a person doesn't quote what he's criticizing, you have to be suspicious that he's not giving you the real goods. In my book, when I criticize somebody, I have the quotations, either in the text or the footnotes. As you see it, if you have my book, you see how I do it. So I answered him page by page for like 70 pages. Then I got tired of it, but it's online, so you can see how I responded to that.
Replying to the second son.
It's called Breaking the Kuzari. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know of any good cases. I know cases that are persuasive to the uninitiated or that pander to certain assumptions made in academia, which then give them a certain gloss a veneer of respectability. But when you go through them in detail, I don't think they're good cases. So I don't think we're struggling at the moment. Yeah.
We spoke in the previous shiurim that we are about the individual divine providence, about a quotation from the Rambam, the Guide 317, which says that all pleasure is somehow a reward for a mitzvah, right? So I mean, my question is then, chas v'shalom, things that happen, a person actually gets pleasure from a forbidden pleasure.
Oh, let's make sure you're not reading something in that isn't there. I didn't say that all pleasure comes from an immediately preceding mitzvah. The mitzvah could have been done 20 years ago.
Right.
And the pain also could be because of something that happened 20 years ago.
Right.
So then the fact that a person gets a forbidden pleasure, not going to contradict that. The thing that he did is forbidden, and the pleasure he's getting is because of something he did 20 years ago.
From the mitzvah.
From the mitzvah that he did 20 years ago, not from the forbidden thing he did now.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But I mean, then, is it a waste of the pleasure that otherwise that mitzvah could have brought in another way that pleasure, or like I mean?
Well, it may be even worse than that. In other words, the pleasure itself could be forbidden.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But that's not the same thing. If I steal money and use it to buy a soda, the soda isn't forbidden. The stealing was forbidden. And the stealing was what enabled me to get the soda. That's not the same as enjoying a cheeseburger, where the cheeseburger itself is forbidden to have pleasure from. Right? The pleasure of the soda that I buy with the stolen money isn't forbidden. The money is forbidden. So it's not the same thing. But the Rambam says explicitly every pleasure. So if even the pleasure was you could have had a sudden spasm in your throat. You could have thrown it up and not had pleasure from it. That could have happened also, right? If it doesn't happen, I mean, the pleasure, according to what the Rambam writes, the pleasure is on the basis of some mitzvah that you did at some time, and the pain is because of some of it you did at some time. I don't see any contradiction there. Yeah.
Just a follow-up to that. Like, let's say you had someone who was wholly wicked, like they lived like a real wicked life, but they got pleasure out of it. They did wicked things, they went around doing what they wanted, and they felt themselves to be enjoying themselves. How do we make a sense of that? That person seems to be doing no mitzvahs, lots of averas, but they're just getting pleasure all the time. Now, when they get somewhere else, maybe they'll get punished, but in the life...
Okay, yeah, but let's just play, let's have a little logic here. You said, suppose there were somebody, how do you make sense out of that? My answer is, there aren't such people. Yeah, I don't have to make sense out of possibilities. I don't have to make sense out of realities. There's no reason to think there's anybody like that. Yeah.
I spoke up earlier about why we can't assume that there are multiple creators. Like, why do we have to jump to that conclusion? And specifically, why do we, why is that the fallback? Like,
Well, I could answer you that when you are thinking about a subject and you have various possible ways to explain it, that one consideration is the simpler the simpler the idea is, the more preferable the idea is. And even though it's complicated and there are different types of simplicity and usually they conflict with one another, but if you're just talking about multiple agencies that do the same job, why should diabetes have one cause? Maybe it has 6 causes. Why should you think it has one? Well, I've discovered one. I haven't discovered any others. As far as I know, every case that I've checked, so why should I even take seriously the idea there are others, unless there's some evidence that there are others, when I have one and I know that does the job. Right? So I think that's certainly right. And then you'll have to, if you talk about multiples, you have to be careful about how to describe them. For example, the Creator, in our view, is all-powerful. You can't have 2 independent things that are all-powerful, because they conflict. There'll be no resolution to how the conflict would end up. So then you'll have to have some kind of hierarchy. Either they split powers, or then you have to understand their character. Do they agree with one another or disagree? Are there cliques or coteries that join together? And the polytheists will have this. This group gangs up on that group, and so on. I mean, then you end up with a gigantically complex picture where a much simpler picture is available. Unless there's some defect in the simpler picture, then you would go with the simpler picture. Right? That would be the normal procedure. Yeah.
Oh yeah, this came up. Why do we name our months after Babylonian gods, if that's correct?
First of all, I don't know who we is. In the entire Bible, up to almost the entire Bible, the months and like the days are the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. They're not named by numbers. They're not named at all. So you have it only in the portions that are dated during the Babylonian era, after the Babylonian, because that's when the prophecy ended, right? So something changed at that time, and not only that, but the script that we use changed. The conditions of Jewish life and existence changed. And those conditions required a different vocabulary and a different script and different priorities, which happens throughout history. I mean, when we moved from a confederation of tribes to a nation with a king after more than 300 years, right, that was a big political shift. And it had legal, certain laws were triggered at that time because the laws of kings goes back to Moses, but there weren't any kings, so they weren't put into effect. So different circumstances, the Torah expresses itself in different ways. It has different resources to express itself in different ways. And in this case, the Babylonian experience had certain materials available for us. And I'll give you 2 parallels. Number one, the Talmud that we follow is the Babylonian Talmud. There's a Jerusalem Talmud, which was written in the land of Israel, but that's not the one we follow. We follow the Babylonian Talmud. So the sages living in Babylon made an eternal contribution to the Jewish people, which has been followed for 2,000 years, and it came from sages in Babylon. Not in Israel, and not in Persia, but in Babylon. Now, the temple was built, the tabernacle in the wilderness was built with booty from Egypt. Really? Egyptian money that they took, the booty that they got in Egypt and at the sea. the trees were planted by Jacob when he came down, and then they were harvested, and they took them along with them. Solomon's temple was built in concert with the king of Lebanon, who provided lumber and workers and to help in the construction. We are not purists in that respect. Some of our greatest people are either converts or the children of converts. The ancestry of the Messiah goes back to Ruth, the convert. So we are not insulated from investments from the outside. So the fact that there's a piece of Babylonian culture which we used in the expression of Jewish themes, to us is not a compromise of our principles in any way. Yeah.
Do you know why God gave us hair? What's the reasoning?
It's Midas Hadin. How's that? A little piece of mysticism. Midas Hadin. Tiny, tiny little tubes through which almost nothing can travel. There are some things, what I'm telling you is true. There are some things which are so high and so powerful that you can't let them escape. If you let them come out full force, they would destroy everything in their path. So they are very, very greatly constricted. So they come out only in tiny, tiny, tiny amounts, which the ones who receive it can bear. That's what hair stands for in Kabbalistic ideas. And therefore, the Ben Yehoyada says, and this applies only to certain communities where he was, and so others like my community, where women, when they get married, shave their heads, whereas men can have long hair and can have earlocks, payas, because a man's character is a character of chesed. And din, expressing chesed, under the control of chesed, as an offshoot or application of chesed, is a harmonious balance. But women's essence is din, and to have hair would be too much din, too much strict justice, and therefore they can't afford it, whereas we can. So there are deep things going on here. The Zohar says that you should never touch the hair of your face or your beard. You should never touch it, never cut it, never trim it. Just let it grow. Here you had something else, but I'll make one more remark and then I'll go on to the next question. When you ask why is there something, you asked it well. You say, for example, why is there a mitzvah of honoring your parents? And the answer you get is, well, they gave birth to you and they took care of you and you owe them gratitude, and without them you wouldn't exist, right? It's not the right question, and the answer is extremely superficial. It didn't happen by accident. So the question should be not, why do we have a mitzvah of honoring our parents? The question should be, why do we have parents?
Yeah.
And the answer is that we have parents so as to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of honoring our parents. The mitzvah is the ultimate reality. The mitzvah is the ultimate explanation, and it explains the physical world. We don't explain the mitzvah in terms of the physical, we explain the physical in terms of the mitzvah. So you asked, why did God give us hair? That's the right question. But then the answer is not going to be to keep us warm in the winter. You could do that with a fur cap. You don't need hair for that. Right? It has to serve some spiritual purpose. Right. Now, the Nazir doesn't cut his hair, and it's called a godly crown on his head. So there's much more going on than just that. There are a lot of things, but the real question is, what spiritual role does hair play? That's the right question to ask. And I gave you a couple of ideas. There's certainly much more than what I told you, because there are a lot of things that I don't know. Yeah, who's next? Yeah.
I guess spinning off of that, there's that point you mentioned where Hashem clothed Adam and Hava after he left the garden. It's like, well, he could have just made the world warm. Why did he specifically have to clothe them? What was going on there that it was?
So I'll tell you, there's an absolutely magnificent Rabbeinu Bachai there. And he says The verse doesn't say he made them clothes. He doesn't say he gave them clothes to wear, which is what Jacob asked for when he was leaving Israel. He says, give me beged lilbosh, give me clothes to wear. It doesn't say that that's what God did to Adam and Chava, he gave them clothes to wear. It said he made them clothes and he dressed them. He dressed them. He just put them in a box and say, get dressed on your own. What exactly is going on there? So the Ben Bachai says, he was concerned for their honor. Their honor. They were wearing fig leaves with which they covered their sexual parts, which is a reminder of part of the transgression that they'd performed. To wear a garment that reminds you of the transgression, that's not dignified. That's not honorable. That's not noble. My children aren't going to go out in the world that way. He gave them either clothes of wool or clothes of linen, head to toe, covered head to toe, in the finest clothing. He quotes a midrash that they were bigdei kahuna, the clothes of the high priest, sending them out into the world in the most honorable and noble fashion. Now, I don't think that's exactly what you expect. After all, he put them in the Garden of Eden, and they rebelled and transgressed and violated and were punished and cursed because of what they did. Is that the time to make them, royal clothing? Yeah, yes it is. Because, as modern psychologists will tell you, 0.01% that they get right, that you don't punish the person, you punish the action. And there has to be a way where, when you perform a punishment, that you send a message that I'm punishing what you did, but I haven't lost my belief in you, I haven't lost my investment in you, I'm severed my relationship with you. So at the time when he's punishing them and kicking them out of the Garden of Eden, and they're subject to the curses that they were told, that time he gives them the best possible clothes. That wouldn't help by turning up the heat and the climate of the world. And then he says, and not only that, but he dressed them. That's quite remarkable that he dressed them under those conditions. So that's the message according to Rabbeinu Bachai. Very profound message. Yeah, what's noch?
We spoke also in the individual divine providence about how the great Tzadikim have protection, and we said also, I wrote down here, 1 second. Well, protection and
Preservation.
And preservation. And right, so I was just thinking that should we consider instruction also as an element that is
Instruction?
instruction?
Let me think for a second. Look, divine providence is running the world, and it takes into account the consequences that happen to people. If God wants me to be aware of something, because by knowing that, I'll be in the condition where he wants me to exercise my free will, he'll arrange that I should know it. It could be through prophecy, it could be through Ruach HaKodesh, divine spirit, it could be arranging a meeting between me and somebody who will tell it to me. He can arrange it in various ways. That's something which he would do for everyone, but in their case, it would be as an element in preserving them and protecting them. Trying to think of a good example. Can't think of a good example of that, but I think your intuition is right. That's an element in preserving, protecting. Knowledge is often very, very important in being able to protect yourself. Yeah. Yes.
So when someone's talking, let's say lashon hara, or it's just an environment that's, it's a negative environment. What do you do on a day-to-day? Avoid, address it. Like let's say someone's talking poorly about another person to you. Cut it off. Say nope. I don't want to listen to this. Plug my ears. What are the behaviors that you should engage in?
Okay, how should you deal when you're confronted with lashon hara? Well, first of all, there is a rule in the Gemara. Just as it is a mitzvah to say that which will be heard, so it is a mitzvah to not say that which will not be heard. The purpose of an interaction with another person is to contribute to his spirituality. If you know the truth and he doesn't, you tell it to him and he gets angry, you're not contributing to his spirituality. But I told him the truth, he should have accepted it from me after prostrating himself on the floor. Not really, not really. Especially if you take that attitude, he's not likely to accept what you say. So the one to whom you share this scruple, this small rule, is dependent upon whether they can hear it or not. But you certainly shouldn't participate in it. I think in a polite way you could try to change the subject, and you could, without mentioning sources or anything else, simply say, I'm finding this particular subject one that's not productive or positive, and I would personally enjoy talking about something else, and then suggest to change the subject. If you see this, one rule is not to say what can't be heard. Another rule is when something wrong is occurring, you shouldn't look as if you agree by not speaking up against it. But again, if speaking up against it is just going to make the people angry at you, and that means they're going to be worse off than they were before, then you have to, I don't know how to weigh that. That'll depend upon the circumstances and long-term consequences, and that's a question for someone who's more learned than I am to answer. But these are the kinds of considerations that you have to take into account. You don't want to project agreement. You certainly don't want to enthusiastically participate. There are other things you can do, gentle things you can do. For example, cast doubt. Really? Where did you hear that? Oh, do you think he has an inside track? He was there when it happened. He saw it. You think, or maybe he heard of it somebody. Just sort of subtly hinting that maybe the information shouldn't be just accepted full blast. And maybe you should think about it, or maybe check it out with somebody else, or just reserve judgment till more evidence comes up. You could have a gentle effect that way, without challenging them and seeming to condemn them. Yeah.
Have you published any of your responses to Zeligman's letter to my rabbi online?
No, that I didn't do. I published responses to other people, some of them quite detailed, but I didn't. It's just a compilation of things that he found elsewhere, and he just pulled them all together into one long screed. It's not, I don't think anything original or especially clever. I didn't read the whole thing even. It was more just copy and paste of things that he found in various places.
You're sure he's not making it all up on his own?
No, he's not making it all up. They made it all up. And he's copying what they made up. Right? I mean, it's not, when you go through these things, and I've been doing it for a long time, and there are certain celebrated objections. There are websites run by Israelis who defected, and they one of the big ones is the value of pi. That's P-I, the Greek letter, not apple pie, lemon meringue pie. And they say there's a Mishnah that says that the value of pi is 3, and everybody knows it isn't 3. Everybody knows it's different from that. And the poor rabbis were so stupid and ignorant that they didn't know that the value of pi isn't 3. Okay, so the first question to ask is, okay, so what is the value of pi? 3.14. Really? It is? 3.14? Well, not exactly. So tell me, what is it exactly? 3.1416. Exactly? Well, not exactly. Well, then tell me exactly. Well, I'm sorry, but it's an irrational number, so you can't write it down. In fact, it happens as transcendental number. It's not even algebraic. So you can't even write an equation for which it's a solution. Oh, so any value that you give is going to be wrong. Hey? Well, yeah, if I wrote down a value, it would be wrong. So then, what's the problem with the Mishnah that wrote down a value that's wrong? Where's the big failure? What is it the ignorant rabbis didn't know, right? Number one. Number two, with a piece of wood and a string, you can do much better than 3. So it isn't as if it's approximation because they couldn't do more precise. A child could do better than that. And then you look carefully at the Gemara, you see that the 3 in the Mishnah, the 3 is based on a verse which describes a structure in Solomon's temple, a big basin, which is described as being 10 units across and 30 units around. Really? Maybe Solomon was rounding off? Now here's what one of the commentators says, it's indicated in Tosfos Rosh, and it's brought by one of the Achronim. What are you going to do with the value of pi? Why would the Mishnah be concerned about the value of pi? Because there are certain laws that are based on square measure, and you might be dealing with a circular structure, and you need to know whether the law is fulfilled or not. So, for example, a sukkah has to have a certain amount of ground area, and it's defined as a square 7 by 7 tvachim. But suppose you have a circular sukkah. Is it big enough or not? Well, it has to have at least as much area as a 7 by 7 sukkah. How much area is that? Well, you're converting a square into circular measure. That requires pi. And your value of pi is not exact. It's either too small or too big. And that you can figure out, that you can calculate. Because you can calculate pi to any number of decimal places you want. And you can see whether your number is either too big or too small. So here's a thought. Let's say I'm dealing with a biblical commandment. Now, our general rule of the biblical commandment is if you have any doubts, be stringent. Here you have the sukkah. Is it big enough or not? Well, if I use the bigger value for pi, then my requirement for the sukkah will be bigger. If I use a smaller value for pi, my requirement for the sukkah will be smaller. So the stringent opinion is to require a bigger area. So under those conditions, I ought to use some approximation of pi which I know is bigger than real pi. Which approximation? That depends on how much precision you need. But I should use one that's bigger. And if the biblical mitzvah is one where the smaller value of pi will be more stringent, then I should use the smaller value of pi. I should be stringent on both sides. That would be following the general method of dealing with situations which you cannot pin down in exact detail. Now, the Mishnah, quoting the verse, says, don't do that. Don't do that. Always use 3. Even if using 3 means that you will be lenient in a biblical commandment, always use 3. Then the Mishnah, based on a verse, is telling me a halacha. Is that telling me an arbitrary geometrical fact, one which, frankly, I wouldn't have needed to know? And if I wanted to know the circumference of Solomon's basin, if you told me that the diameter is 10, I can figure out for myself better than 30 what the circumference is. No, it's teaching me this is how you convert measure using pi. You convert it using 3 because that's what the law wants you to do, not because it's geometrically as accurate as you could possibly be. Then the Mishnah and the Gemara are teaching you a halacha, which is what they should be doing, rather than teaching you geometry. And it's not something which you can contradict on the basis of your knowledge of geometry and algebra and real numbers. So this if you go through 60 of these, you get used to it. This is the kind of thing that's going on. This is the kind of problems that they bring up. They don't follow it out to the end. They themselves don't know the math well enough to understand that they're making a mistake. So you get used to it. Yeah.
I have a question about Matan Torah, and I just am curious. I have 2 passages here, and I'm trying to understand how we know that Moshe descended the mountain. Did he descend the mountain with the Torah scroll, or just the tablets? In Parshas Mishpatim, pasuk 12, it says Hashem. In the translation says, Hashem said to Moses, "Ascend to me to the mountain and remain there. I shall give you the stone tablets and the teaching and the commandment that I've written to teach them." So I know that some commentaries say that to teach them represents the Torah, or and then it says the tablets. And anyways, later on in Parshas Kisisa, pasuk 15, it says Moshe turned and descended from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, tablets inscribed on both their sides. They were inscribed on one side and on the other. But it just says tablets. It doesn't say.
Right, but now the word Torah doesn't mean Torah scroll. You say Torah scroll in Hebrew as Sefer Torah or Sefer HaTorah. If you take a look at the end of the Quran, there Moshe is told to write the scroll. He did that at the end of his life. The Torah scroll came into existence at the end of Moses' life.
So he didn't write it at the top.
He didn't write it, and God didn't give it to him, so on and so on. He gave him a lot of information orally, and Moses taught that information to the people orally. But the actual scroll came into existence only at the end of his life. So when you talk about coming down with a physical object is the tablets. When you talk about coming down with information, the Torah and the mitzvah and everything else, that God gave him by teaching it to him. That's
while he was on the mountain.
While he was on the mountain.
So he received all the information, knowledge of the Torah, wisdom, but it wasn't written until later.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
So this is following up on a thread before, right? Like the last part we left off, and the subject became clear with the thing, was that it was this idea that when all creation is sort of played out, it's probably likely that every Jew who's part of the covenant and doesn't remove themselves from it, that they'll all sort of end with the same perfected soul and the same amount of merit, or something like that. Part 1 on the question is, well, do goyim generally not have the ability to achieve that by the time that creation finishes? So they won't have the ability to have that sort of merit which will go to every Jew. And then if that's the case, isn't it a good thing for us to convince as many people to convert as possible, because then that'll be the only way that we can really glorify the afterlife, if it's the case that we ourselves will sort of finish off with a completed soul no matter what?
Okay, I think the question that you want to ask doesn't depend upon part of the first premise that all Jews have exactly the same share and exactly the same portion. That's controversial and difficult, and I'm not going to deal with that part of it. But there's no question that there's a systematic difference between what a Jew gets and what a non-Jew gets. Now, and I want to give to your question a qualified yes. That's what I'm going to say. The Ramchal in the Derech Hashem, in the first part, describes the genesis of humanity, and he traces 4 stages. In every stage, the Kadosh Baruch Hu created in such a way that there would be a single homogeneous humanity, not a 2-tiered humanity, an upper tier and a lower tier, Jews and non-Jews. If Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden had done what they were supposed to do. Had they succeeded at their challenge, history would have been over, and they would have gone through a process of entering the world to come, and there wouldn't have been two groups, the upper group and the lower group. It would have been just one group. That was step one, stage one. Stage two, they failed, they were expelled, and humanity grew, and Abraham became one who knew God and was attached to God in a certain way. Ramchal says, anyone and everyone could have done what Abraham did. It wasn't exclusive, it wasn't just the winner of the race. And that was the challenge. The challenge was for everyone to do what Abraham did, which would have meant, again, to be a single, homogeneous humanity. They didn't, only Abraham did it. Okay, now his nation came into existence together with the other nations. Stage three, from there on, any nation or part of a nation could simply detach itself and become part of the Jewish nation. Like, for example, there were people who were grafted onto the Jewish people. That could have happened, and all of humanity could have done that. That was stage three. Stage four, when the Torah was given, you probably know the Midrash that God offered the Torah to all the other nations of the world. Now, don't make a mistake. It doesn't mean he offered to them in place of the Jewish people. He offered to them in addition to the Jewish people. There was no possibility that the world could live without the Jews having the Torah. But the other nations could have joined us. There could have been a single revelation of the Torah to the whole of humanity together, and there would have been a single homogeneous humanity. That's 4 stages. And I sometimes say it's 4.5, because after that, any individual non-Jew who wants to become a Jew could become a Jew. The ideal perfection of humanity would be that all should be Jews. I'll say something even more than that. Who were Adam and Chava? Adam and Chava were Jews. The identity of Judaism is the identity of real humanity. That's why there's a continuous process of divine invitation to have people become Jewish. Yeshayahu says that we're supposed to be Ohr Lagoyim, a light unto the nations. When we fail at the golden calf and at the spies, and that God says to Moses, I'm going to destroy them, and Moses offers counter arguments. One counter argument he offers on both occasions is, what will the Goyim say? Who cares what the Goyim say? I'll tell you who, the Creator cares. Because the Jewish people are supposed to be a kind of bridgehead for a relationship with the whole world. And if the Goyim are going to misunderstand the event and then attribute to HaKadosh Baruch Hu goals and strategies and means which are false, that's going to injure the communication and understanding, and that's something which God doesn't want. When Moses tells God that he should do something for a certain reason, that's because Moses understands this reason is something which God wants. Otherwise, it's foolish as a reason. And indeed, when it comes to the spies, Moses says, don't destroy the people for 3 reasons, A, B, C. And God says, Salachti kidvarecha, and kidvarecha is spelled without a yud, which means it's singular. I've forgiven according to your word, not your words. So the oral tradition says, aha, Moses gave 3 reasons, and God said singular. Apparently, God accepted only one of the 3. Which one is that? $64,000 question. And the answer is, what will the Goyim say? That's the one that was accepted. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants all human beings to be the real humanity, and the real humanity is the Jewish people. So there's no question that the world would be a better place if all non-Jews became Jews. No question it would be a better place. Indeed, there's a Gemara that says that non-Jews are subject to a certain kind of punishment, and Tosfos discusses what it could be for. One suggestion is, it took them too long to convert. Once they made up their minds that the Torah is true and that's where they belong, they delayed converting. Yeah, but there's a convention next month. Let's do it 2 months from now. Right? Meaning, once you realize what it is, then you should do it right away, because the world's a better place when you do it. So, if there were a cost-free, danger-free way to encourage non-Jews to become Jews, we should definitely do it. Trouble is that the hypothesis is almost never true. Cost-free, danger-free. Jews can be accepted and sometimes cooperated with when they're too weak to do anything significant. The minute they get to be strong, the cooperation stops. Look at the world against Israel. And especially if you're going to attack their religions, you're going to steal souls from them, that's why we don't do it. We do support people who want to become Jewish. We help in the process of teaching them and encouraging them. Of course, first step is to discourage them, but we make ourselves available to play a role in the process because we want to test their motivation, make sure the motivation is sincere. But no question that would be the highest fulfillment of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants and wanted all the way through for humanity. And if we play a role in that without, then it would be definitely worthwhile. Yeah.
When we sing and laugh and dance together, are these signs and feelings of that one homogeneous humanity?
We sing and dance with who?
Let's say we're with each other, right? Like, let's say we're singing, or at a wedding, guys are holding, they're holding each other and dancing.
Yeah.
There's a connection. There's a connection with each other. There's a fun feeling. Let's say you're joking with each other. There's a connection. Does that point towards the larger sign that we're all just one?
Well, but now in that context, the we would be just the Jewish people.
Yeah.
He's asking about our relationship to the non-Jewish world.
I'm just saying.
But yeah.
I'm not just saying. I'm saying everyone, actually, not just Jewish people. Jews and.
Well, it's not common for Jews and non-Jews to dance together, just because the occasions that precipitate dancing are usually occasions that are attended by Jews. But you do have it. I'll tell you where you have it, where a convert is one of the people getting married, and their family attends the wedding. Then the circle will include Jews and non-Jews together. And I think that could be, but then that can't be an expression of equality and oneness because they aren't Jews. So their character, their whole essence is different. In the terms that I just told you, they are not fully human. They're not fully human. So they have, what the literature calls 7 mitzvos, which is really about 65. It's 7 categories. But out of 613, they have about 65. And the souls are made to be appropriately expressed through the 65. And if they live out the 65 in the appropriate way, they will go to the world to come. But that's not the same as having a soul that's addressed by 613. It would be unfair, unjust of God to give 2 different people the same capacities and give them vastly different challenges. That would be just, in moral terms, it would be incompetent. So, and then you're right about your reference to the world to come. Their status in the world to come is not the same as the Jewish status in the world to come. At least at initial stages, the world to come has progression of stages, and I'm not well enough versed to talk about the end. Part of what you said at the beginning, I don't want to comment on because it's a question of what happens later, down the road, and I'm in the middle of a long-standing disagreement with my Rebbetzin about that, and I haven't been able to convince her yet. So if I haven't been able to convince her, that means I have to be careful with the idea because maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
So on that, I mean more of like why do we try to make each other laugh? It's a connection.
Why do we try to make each other laugh? I mean, we do, right?
Yeah,
we pay people to do that.
Right? Why do we do that? On the deeper meaning behind why we try to make each other laugh? Why we, when we're together, when we're connecting, is there a deeper spiritual principle that connects?
Look, there's lots of different kinds of laughter.
Mm-hmm.
and they express different things. When Abraham hears from God that he's going to have children, he laughs. Later, when Sarah hears that she's going to have children, she also laughs. But the commentators make it quite clear that Abraham laughs in joy, and she laughs in disbelief. And if you look very, very carefully at the words, you'll see that there's a difference, because by Abraham it says Vayitzchak, which means he laughed, and with Sarah it says Vatitzchak b'kirbah, she laughed within her, which means she stifled the laugh. And when you stifle something, it's because you don't want it to be observed. If you don't want it to be observed, that usually means there's something embarrassing about it. If she had laughed in joy, there would be no reason to stifle it. But he laughed in joy. So the question is what kind of laughter it is. The psalm which describes our reaction to the coming of the Mashiach and rebuilding the temple, all the rest, Azimali Schok Pinu. The laughter of our mouths will be full. That'll be the laughter of joy, the laughter of astonishment, the laughter of wonder. So that's the kind of laughter that you want to provoke in a person. You see, if you in yeshiva, you watch people talking and discussing and debating and yelling and screaming and pounding the table, the way it happens in yeshivas. But sometimes you'll see broad smiles. Broad smiles. A question was answered, an insight was delivered, and that's the kind of smiles that you want to, or bring good tidings to someone. A tiny, tiny thing. With this, I'm going to quit. My Chavrusa said to me this morning. If you know this story, but in Egypt, the king, the pharaoh, told the midwives to kill the boys, newborn boys. So the oral tradition says he gave them a sign so that during birth they'd be able to know which is a boy and which is a girl. If a child is exiting the mother face up, then it's a girl. And if a child is exiting the mother face down, then it's a boy. That way, the midwife could know before the rest of the body comes out, and perhaps could choke the boys, on the way out, and make it look natural, so on and so on, right? So many people ask, but boys and girls aren't born that way. There's no systematic correlation between how the face is oriented, whether to the sex of the baby. So what's written in the source is wrong. Who is the source quoting? It's quoting Pharaoh. Does he have to be right? No, he doesn't have to be right. That's the symptom that Pharaoh gave to the midwives. And he's wrong. Right? And they didn't know what he said anyhow, so they didn't use it. The tradition is not committing itself to that fact. It's reporting from the Pharaoh's mouth. No shtuyot, it's Pharaoh said. We have lots of dumb stuff that comes out of Pharaoh's mouth. There's another dumb thing that came out of Pharaoh's mouth. Putting two together like that happens a lot. Where something seems problematic, you think, wait a minute, it was on Tuesday evening. Tuesday evening isn't the problem, it's only Wednesday's the problem. No. You have to think things through and go through them over and over again until all the web becomes clear as to what's connected to what. And then when you get insights like that, and there are thousands of insights like that. Someday I'll give a shiur on questions that bothered me for decades until I found answers. Okay.